Welcome to Chapter 4, Socialization and the Life Course. Some things we're going to talk about are the role of socialization, the self in socialization, agents of socialization, socialization throughout the life course, role transitions through the life course, and social policy and socialization, child care around the world. The role of socialization. So it's the interaction of heredity and environment. So think of nature versus nurture. So does someone's biology determine how they're going to become or who they're going to become? Or does the environment they grow up in have more of an impact? Or do you believe it is both? So socialization is a lifelong process in which people learn to become who they're going to be as an adult. And that would include attitudes, values, behaviors, and cultures. Personality is the attitudes, the patterns of attitudes and behavior that a person takes. Social environment, the impact of isolation. So there are 3 little stories you could read about on page 73 and 74. The first one is on 73, and it's about Isabel. So her mom had her out of wedlock, and so Isabel's grandparents were really upset about it. So Isabel had to stay in a darkened basement for 6 years of her life, the first 6 years. So Isabel, of course, wasn't able to communicate with other humans. She would communicate with her mom using mostly nonverbal communication or grunts, but she wasn't able to talk. Her mom didn't really talk to her that much. This was in the 1930s. So after the mom escaped, she was able to get Isabel some help. And Isabel eventually was able to socialize normally by the age of 14 when she was in 6th grade at that age. But before then, they said that she was at like a baby's level of, a baby's level of competence. And for about 2 months, it took her to start talking and responding and learning words. In 9 months, she's actually saying sentences and things like that. So her socialization was sped up because she was around other people, and luckily she was able to go through that process. But it's really sad the type of isolation abuse she went through. And then on 74, it talks about the Romanian orphans and primate studies. So I'll talk about the primate studies first. Harlow, which was a sociologist, he decided to have rhesus monkeys and have them isolated also. So it was the same effect that Isabel had, where she was fearful of strangers or people, things like that at first, and she would react wildly. And so with the monkeys, since they weren't raised with the parent monkeys, they were just by themselves. So that's also pretty terrible. And with the Romanian orphans, this was in the early 1900s. So there were about 32,000 of them that were institutionalized as orphans, and they would lay in their cribs for about 18 to 20 hours a day without any contact from anybody, and they would just lay next to their bottles. So of course they were fearful, and they got adopted by different people from all over the world, but of course some of the kids had issues. So if you are interested in more of that, you can go to 73 and 74 in your book. The influence of heredity. So there are lots of studies when it comes to twins. Basically, they're trying to study nature versus nurture, and the best way is to look at twins since they're the same if they share the same embryo. So usually the twins differ if they're raised in different environments. However, sometimes they can still like the same things. Some of the studies that have been done were actually really bad because the parents didn't know the kids are being studied, or the kids would be separated at birth. The adoptive parents wouldn't know what happened. The biological parents wouldn't know that they were separated. The adoptive parents, they wouldn't know anything, but they also wouldn't know if there was even another twin or even a triplet. And then the children wouldn't know. They would just think that it was a normal process for a social worker to come and ask them questions and observe them, but they didn't really realize that this was all part of an elaborate experiment. It's happened in different places, and it's happened at different times, different eras of the U.S. The self and socialization. So we're able to understand who we are by interacting with other people and just being in different experiences. Then we learn about our own perceptions and our own experiences and how we understand the world. So it is very important that we're able to be around other people. Sociological approaches to the self. So we have Coley with the looking glass self. He was a sociologist from the early 1900s. So basically, when it comes to the looking glass self, we're looking at ourselves sort of from our interactions with other people. We think about our interactions, we think about how people perceive us, we think about the face or the image that we want to present, and that all that compiles our looking glass self. Mead and the Stages of Self. So he's from the 1960s. We start with the preparatory stage, and that's where kids imitate who's around them. So that's also how they develop part of their personalities, is mimicking. And then we have the play stage, and that's where children develop skills in communicating through symbols. And they take on role taking, which is the process of mentally assuming a perspective of another and responding to that imagined viewpoint. So kids will play, they'll play and they'll have role play, and they'll play different games, and they're able to interact with one another and sometimes be able to see from the other kid's point of view how they feel. And then we have the game stage, which is about ages 8 or 9, and children grasp not only their own social positions, but also those of others around them. So kids are less egocentric at the game stage, whereas before it's all about them, and they're able to think more of other people. So before they would assume what other people feel, but in the game stage they're able to question other people, listen to their concerns. And then we have the generalized other, where attitudes, viewpoints, and expectations of the society as a whole are taken into account in behavior. So they learn about society through their parents and the adults around them. They learn like what's important, and so are able to take how they act into society. So they know that you go to the bathroom in private. So around 8 or 9, a kid knows that you can't just go to the bathroom anywhere. You actually have to go to an actual physical bathroom instead of just using the bathroom on themselves. This table might be a better articulation of Mead's stages of the self, but that is also on page 76 of your book, and it goes into 77 if you want more of an explanation of it. So when it comes to the majority of these sociologists, I'm not going to quiz you on these. I'm more so going to talk about, or the quizzes are going to have the big ideas, but not necessarily the sociologists and what each person did or said. I might ask you about an idea, like I might ask you about the theory of self, but I won't ask you specifically like what does Mead, or what did Mead propose, or what did he contribute to the field of sociology. I won't ask you things like that. So we have the preparation stage, and then we have the play stage and the game stage. And so it sort of tells you that the self isn't present yet, it's developing, and then the self is present. Continuing on with Mead and the theory of self. So initially when we're born, we start out as being egocentric. We are unable to look outside of ourselves and look at other people. So the self begins as a privileged central position in a person's world. So everything, if you have a kid, everything's about them. They own all your tablets. They basically own you. They want to eat when they want to eat. They want to cry when they want to cry. They don't really care if you have to study or anything like that. And it's because they're unable to see outside themselves. But as they mature and grow older, they're able to look at other people's concerns and take that into consideration. Goffman deals with the presentation of yourself. So it's like the facade or the impression or the face work that we want to show to other people. So we all have a different face depending where we're at. If you're at home, you're probably more relaxed and more yourself. If you're at work, you're more of a conservative person, a conservative version of yourself. And also like our online image, things like that. So we have various types of images that we show to the world. Piaget is a psychologist that dealt with the stages of development. So as far as cognitive development goes, we have the sensory motor stage, the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and the formal operational stage. And you can find Piaget on page 78 of your book for the most part. So the sensory motor stage is when the kids are very, very young. If you think about they're using their senses and their motor skills. So that's when kids put everything in their mouths. They smell things, they taste things, they touch things all the time. And then they have the pre-operational stage. And then children begin to use words and symbols and ideas. And usually their ideas come from the people that are around them the most. So it could be their teachers, it could be their family members, if someone is consistently babysitting them, but that's when they take their environment more into account. So we're basically shaping their environment at that age. Then we have the concrete operational stage, and kids will engage in more logical thinking. They're able to know right from wrong. They know that a formless lump of clay is shaped into a snake, but it's still clay. They learn more about if you pour water from one glass that's tall into a glass that's more wide. They know that it's the same amount of water. And then the formal operational stage, it's like 12 years and older. And that's when kids become more sophisticated in their thoughts and they can deal logically with ideas and values. They also are becoming more of themselves, and they also are concerned more of with their parents' concerns, which would be like the world and what are the social concerns that people deal with. Agents of socialization. So depending on the experiences or situations a person is brought into, they might change their ideas when it comes to certain things, and it is okay if they sort of change who they are as long as they're changing because they want to and it's for the better. But we do change some of our ideals over a lifetime. However, that does not mean that something is wrong if someone sticks to the same morals they had when they were younger. Various agents of socialization would fall into family, school, and peer groups. So family teaches you about what's important in life, who you are, when it comes to gender roles. However, I know that gender roles are definitely changing. They're not as traditional or heterosexual as they were before. So I think with the younger generations, they might have a different way of teaching their children. But usually, or at least back in the day, or maybe even present day still, people learn their gender roles from their parents. They learn who to emulate and who to act like, who to dress like, who to talk like by looking at their family. We also have schools. So schools play a large role in students' lives and in children's lives. So if you have a teacher that's really negative and is dismissive to the child and doesn't like them, a child will start to think that maybe they're not worthy, or maybe that they're not liked by other teachers. I hear this with my students when it comes to having ADD. Some teachers might have put them in a corner all by themselves when they were younger, so they have low self-esteem by the time they get to college. But to me, I just wish our school systems wasn't like that, because honestly, some people are able to focus more than other people, or they have more energy than other people, and we all learn differently, and that should be okay. And then we have the peer group. So as you know, peer pressure, friends become more important depending on where you are at in your life. And then also when you become a young adult, like your peers, who you date, things like that also play a huge role in the way you see things. Your friends probably have the same ideological beliefs that you do, the same political beliefs, or at least you have some similarities in various ways. And this table just talks about high school popularity. So according to college men and according to college women, what makes people popular in high school as far as girls and then boys. And you'll see that there are some differences the way men view things compared to the way women view things. Mass media and technology. So technology is growing, of course, and so is mass media. 95% of people online are ages 12 to 17, but 91% of them post photos identifying themselves, and 92% of them use their real names. 82% post their birth dates on social media, and now we have concerns as far as babies and their use of technology and the internet. That might sound odd to you unless you have a kid that's young right now. My son learned to swipe on my phone, I want to say when he's about 5 months or 4 months, just from watching me. So it's pretty fascinating the way technology is growing. And of course, the media has a huge role in the way people are socialized. It tells us, especially young people, what to think, how to feel, what's interesting, what should concern us, and then it blocks out certain things that really should concern us. So those two are agents of socialization. Workplace socialization is important. People are joining their workforce younger and younger again, so teenagers have jobs. I started my first job when I was 14. A lot of people start it when they're 15 or 16, even if it's just a small job. So since education is also a role of socialization, so is the workplace, because it helps people learn who they are, helps them learn responsibility, and they're also growing and interacting with the people there. And then, of course, religion and states are part of socialization. So the government and organized religion impact life course by reinstituting some rites of passage. So it depends on the person's religion when it comes to rites of passage. And then also from the state. So church and state are supposed to be separated in the U.S. And when I say church, I mean any of the religious faiths of any sort. So we know that, however, these things do intertwine. Rites of passage would demonstrate that you're going from one stage to another. So it could be like leaving preschool and going to kindergarten. It could be graduating high school. It could be getting a certification in something. It could be reaching a new level in a certain sport that you're in. And then the life course approach. So you look at the various factors that influence people throughout their lives. So when it comes to young adulthood, there's the emerging adult. There's a process of people going to college, process of people working while in college, and then there's a process of people that just work after they finish all their education. You could also think of marriage, having the first kid, maybe taking care of your parents if you're part of the sandwich generation. Anticipatory socialization, that's where a person practices or rehearses for future occupations and social relationships. So you can think of somebody looking in the mirror, going to ask someone for a date, or somebody looking in the mirror to practice for a job interview, or maybe practicing in front of family. And then we have resocialization, and that's getting rid of a former behavior and continuing on with a new behavior. So that could be somebody that has adopted a new religion or has left their religion. It could be somebody that is no longer on drugs, people leaving prison and forming a new lifestyle, and then also soldiers returning from combat tours. Total institution is where the person's life is completely controlled and regulated. So that could be like living in a mental institution, jail, prison, military lifestyle. And then also a degradation ceremony is where the person is like stripped of who they were from before, or at least partially. And the example from the book is somebody having to go through the process of leaving all their clothing behind when they're entering into the prison system. Socialization is a lifelong process, and it can vary. So Levinson stated that one transitional stage begins when an individual gradually enters the adult world. So once you're an adult, then you get married, some people, then some can have kids, some can advance in their careers, and then some people go into retirement. So when it comes to a midlife crisis, which could be one of those stages, transitional stages that Levinson was referring to, so people feel like they haven't met their basic goals and ambitions. They feel like they're lost. They feel like maybe they wanted to do something differently, or they're not really sure how they ended up where they were at. They might be unhappy with their job or their marriage or the choices they've made. They might want to make some new choices and new situations for themselves. So some people go through this midlife crisis stage. The sandwich generation is where an adult has to take care of their kids and also their parents. So by 2010, 13 million Americans are caring for both children and parents. And you can think that would be a financial strain and an emotional strain on family members, but it definitely is something that people go through. And a lot of the caregiving falls disproportionately on women. But you guys are nurses, so it will definitely help for you to be a nurse in order to help people in the sandwich generation as part of your family. Retirement. So there are phases when it comes to retirement. There's the pre-retirement phase, and that's where people are anticipating retirement and what it's going to be like. At that time, also, some people are like really happy or excited for it. The near phase is when the person decides on a specific date, and so they're gearing up for this retirement and change of life style. Then the honeymoon phase is after the person leaves their job, and they're like really happy, maybe going on vacations, relaxing more, partaking in maybe hobbies or other things that they've wanted to all this time, but they've been too busy. Then there's the disenchantment phase, and that's where people aren't as happy as they were before. They start to feel let down and maybe depressed, a little lost. Reorientation phase is when they're trying to figure out who they want to be now, what is the meaning of life, and thinking about some alternatives to retiring. So some people actually take a job that's no longer a career, but something to get them out the house and socialize. They spend more time in their neighborhoods or in their religious community, or they volunteer. And then there's the stability phase, and that's where the person becomes more stable after this mentally, because now they found something that works for them and they're starting to get their gears going again, just not in the same way as before they retired, but still in a happy way. And then we have the termination phase, and that's when people can no longer perform the same activities, so they start to lose some of their autonomy as they age. In adjusting to retirement, we might end up with naturally occurring retirement communities, and that's just an area where a lot of people who are of retirement age have moved to, and maybe some younger people have moved away. So they end up with their own communities, not on purpose, but it just ends up that way. And these can be threatened by gentrification. Childcare. So the majority of children are cared for by women all over the world. In the U.S., 88% of employed mothers depend on others to care for their children. And that's because people can no longer, well, some people, a lot of people can no longer live off of a one household income. So people have to leave their kids more and more. So some states are actually having paternity leave. So it's coming slowly, but it's coming. And some states are looking at more protections for women as far as having more time off when it comes to maternity leave. So this depends where the kids are as far as some countries. So I have a friend come from Kazakhstan, and they get 3 years off. I guess in her country, they believe it's really important that someone is with the child all the time. That's a family member. In France, it's about $1 for 2 kids to be put in daycare per day, and they're actually learning education and being cared for, and there's a lower ratio of kids to adults. So there are places where there's progress for maternal health and paternal health also. When it comes to child care and socialization, if the child ends up in a positive daycare where good things happen, they don't experience any trauma or anything, then it could be good for socialization because they're learning to interact with other kids, especially if they don't have siblings yet, or maybe the siblings aren't of the age where the child can socialize properly. And that would just mean that the child doesn't have a bunch of kids in the family that is its own age. So the kid has to learn from its peers, and that can be positive. However, of course, we know that everyone doesn't have equitable access to proper child care, and it is very expensive to get the proper child care, unless, of course, you have someone in your family that can watch your baby that you completely trust. So interactionists value child care outside the home, and then the conflicts perspective notes the child care costs are a burden for lower class families. As we know, things aren't equal. Some people do get their child care assisted with stipends and things like that, but there's always a group of people that make too much to get help but don't make enough to have things run smoothly. And then the feminist perspective questions the low status and wages of child care workers, believing that they should get paid more. We do know that if we have professions where people get paid more and are respected more, then they're going to be better at their job, and we're going to attract more people that are going to care about the children.